Deadline week, obviously busy week, committee work, and then we transition to busy floor work next week. Next week, expect on Tuesday with redistricting, we will be looking at the maps that were submitted through public submission and allowing people who submitted those to have comment before the committee. And then on Wednesday, we will be swearing in the newly elected Senator Jake Merrick from Senate District 22, 8:45 in the morning. So those are two things that you probably ought to be watching for next week, and I'm going to open it up to any questions people may have.
Earlier today, after we left the Senate Business, Commerce, and Tourism, they gave a new House recommendation, the House Bill 2087. Sorry about that. Earlier, after you left Senate Business and Commerce, they gave a new House recommendation, the House Bill 2087, which permits office holders to use money from their campaign account to pay caucus dues and contributions. Senator Rader indicated that the Senate Republican caucus does have dues. How much are those?
$100 for a year.
And what do you use that money for?
Paying for lunches and paying for things like that.
I've got more.
Yeah, so I don't know if you're aware, obviously busy week. Representative Hilbert introduced legislation earlier this week that pertains to the state school boards and charter school amendment, and his legislation would essentially give charter schools a cut of state marijuana revenue. And it sounds like that would essentially nullify the settlement that the state school board made with charter schools. I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on that yet? Or, I mean, do you think that's the right approach? Do you think charter schools deserve more money than just marijuana revenue? Have at it.
So I'm familiar that he has a bill that seeks to address that issue. I'm not familiar with the ins and outs of his legislation yet. It's an issue that we do need to address. After the State Board of Education settled the lawsuit, assuming that would stand judicial scrutiny, there's a potential that wholly virtual charter schools would receive funds like ad valorem and transportation dollars, and that is completely appropriate for schools that are traditional brick and mortar charter schools like any other school would be. We need to figure out what is right on the fully virtual schools. They obviously do not incur transportation costs, they don't have building costs, but it's not as easy as one may think, because some of those operate under charters from universities, some operate under a state charter, and then the bulk of them operate under a local school district charter. The local school district charter is the easiest nut to crack. There's pretty widespread agreement that those who have brick and mortar in that situation deserve to have the same type of funds available to them. The disagreements come when you get into those more nuanced areas, and we've got to solve that before the end of session. I'll take a look at Representative Hilbert's legislation, but I am not familiar with exactly how he seeks to address it.
Why do you say we have to solve that before the end of session?
Because it's before us, and we won't have another crack at it until next February. It's not, again, I don't know all the ins and outs of the settlement. I know there's controversy around some of that. I wasn't involved in that any way, shape, or form, but I do know there's pending litigation. Assuming that the board decision withstands that scrutiny, it creates this issue where I am under the assumption that it creates this situation where these virtual schools would receive the same type of funding as brick and mortar, and we need to address that.
Sorry, last question. Following up on that, if the legislature does address all of this in legislation, maybe makes it take effect as soon as possible, do you think that could take some of the legal pressure off the State Board of Ed? That if you codify some of these things, then any lawsuits may go away?
You know, I don't know. And again, not having read Hilbert's language yet, I don't know if the effective date is contingent upon this settlement. being held justified. So I'll have to look at that, but we've got to do our job regardless of what's going on the outside. I tend to try not to get involved in pending litigation, but we need to make sure that there is equity in our funding.
Before you go, Sean, let's go to Barbara. Let me turn the volume up first. Barbara, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Pro Tem. I have two questions. The first one is in business, commerce, and tourism. You were presenting a bill and referenced that you were unhappy with some horse trading that had gone on across the rotunda. What was that about?
There is always accusations of horse trading in the legislative process, but I do not operate in such a manner. And I was disgusted by something I found out during the meeting dealing with a piece of legislation that I was involved in. The level of gamesmanship was just completely unacceptable to me, and that was, I expressed that.
Bill, the substitute on that?
Repeat your question, Barbara. I had the volume turned down, sorry.
Was it the bill dealing with transgender athletes?
No, that didn't have anything to do with the frustration. There's issues being tied together that have no nexus whatsoever to the underlying bill, and holding good legislation hostage to be able to get upper hand on negotiations is unacceptable in my mind.
Okay. My second question is, what's the status of the Speaker's two tax cut bills? Thompson says it's going to be part of the budget negotiations, so it looks like this is going to get a serious look.
So the Speaker's two bills were not heard in committee this week in Finance, both the corporate income tax cut and the personal income tax credit. There is still ongoing discussion about the personal income tax and can we provide relief, 1/4% from 5 to 475. There is not an appetite to do the corporate income tax cut in the Oklahoma State Senate. There's not the appetite within my caucus. I don't have that appetite. We are living in a time that's uncertain financially. Having come through COVID, we're setting very nicely financially as a state, but I need to remind you that we cut the budget by $1.3 billion last year when turns out we needed to cut it about $800 million. So about $500 million of the $1 billion surplus comes from cutting deeper than we had to last session. And then there's a non-quantified amount that is coming off of federal unemployment type benefits, federal monies going through to agencies, federal stimulus checks to individuals. And I think this is not an appropriate time to be looking at a $642 million over the course of 5-year hit to the budget. I was here 3 sessions ago when we had the teacher walkout and efforted together to be able to come up with the revenue to be able to pay our obligations. I do not believe, and nor does my caucus believe, that the corporate tax cut is appropriate at this time.
To follow up on Barbara's question a little bit, so does that mean she asked about the tax bills in general being part of the budget discussions. Does that mean the corporate tax cut is not on the table in budget discussions?
The corporate tax cut is not a part of negotiations that the Senate will be a part of. We can have a conversation on other areas of tax policy, but there's just not the appetite. And it's not a political decision, it's a policy decision. The politics of it are, as a Republican, yes, we cut taxes. That's a great political statement. We've got to get beyond the politics of it and see, is it the right policy? And when you look at the corporate tax, it is an unstable source of revenue, there's no doubt about it. But about 90 million of it goes off the top into things like teacher retirement, other important money. So you just can't look at the 642. You've got to look at the money that's coming off the top and funding very important things such as teacher retirement. corporate tax cuts not part of the negotiations that we will be part of. Obviously, other people will be advocating for that, but that will not be something we will be agreeable to.
Looks like Paul Monies has a question. Paul, go ahead.
Thanks. Hi, Mr. Pro Tem. I just want to get a little bit more detail on your redistricting efforts next week with the public and kind of comment on the maps. Can you explain a little bit more what might be happening, what we might be seeing when that comes out?
Yes, if I knew any more about what was going to come. I have delegated that to Senator Paxton and staff to be able to come up with it. But people submitted the maps. The maps have all 48 districts. They meet the requirements that we have to meet, or they were supposed to. And so we'll have a serious dialogue with the people who submitted those maps in that meeting on Tuesday. But as far as like the mechanics of are we going to be displaying the maps on an overhead and all that stuff, that's a level of detail that I don't know. And Aaron.
Maps are on the website?
Oh, maps are already on the website. See, Paul, if you haven't seen them, the maps are on the website, and Aaron Cooper's the one that just told me that, so he can probably direct you to the appropriate spot.
Okay, thank you.
I do have one more going back to the horse trading issue. Was the bill in question one of those not heard in House Rules today? And if so, which one?
Well, obviously, I mean, all of my bills got laid over Tuesday, and then they all got laid over today. Important things like infant and maternal mortality, moving the school board election, some things to improve loft, other issues, open meetings, really important substantive issues that had nothing to do with the other bill, and it's agitating to me. I know it happens. I'm not a naive person. I hold myself to a standard, and I expect bills to be judged on their merit or lack thereof, not on trying to take as many hostages as possible to get your way.
Which bill? Which bill of yours is, or what is the issue that underlies this?
It's gamesmanship. I'm not going to get into the absolute details, but it pertained to the bill that I was presenting in committee. That was part of that.
You guys have anything else? Any other questions from folks on Zoom? All right, I think that's it. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.